Have you ever stopped to wonder how navigators managed to cross entire oceans without losing their way, long before satellites were invented? How 15th century sailors could find tiny, lost islands in the middle of the Pacific with surgical precision, using only instruments that would fit in the palm of their hand? The answer lies in a tool so ingenious that even today few fully understand how it works. A technology that for centuries was considered more valuable than gold and diamonds, protected by state secrets and kept under lock and key by master navigators. And the most intriguing part, in many ways it was smarter and more reliable than modern GPS. But before revealing what this mysterious tool is, I need to tell a story that will make you question everything you think you know about navigation. It was a March morning in 1707, and a fleet of 5 Royal Navy ships sailed through the murky waters of the English Channel. Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel, a veteran of countless naval battles, commanded over 1,600 men headed for the port of Portsmouth. It seemed like a routine operation. After all, these were familiar waters, close to the English coast. But something was terribly wrong. The navigators trusted their nautical charts, their route calculations, and decades of accumulated experience. Yet on that fateful night, all their instruments and knowledge proved useless. Why? Because there was one element they couldn't calculate precisely: their exact position in the ocean. At 8 p.m. that night, the unthinkable happened. One after another, 4 of the 5 ships were smashed against the rocks of the Scilly Isles. More than 1,400 men died within minutes, including the Admiral himself. It was one of the worst naval disasters in British history, and all because of a navigation error. But here's the detail that will surprise you. If those navigators had in their hands the tool I'm about to talk about, this tragedy would never have happened. And here's the most ironic part. This tool had existed for more than a century, but remained a closely guarded secret in distant ports. You're probably wondering what tool this is, right? Hold on, because the story gets even more fascinating. Imagine, for a moment, that you are lost in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in 1750. There's no coast in sight, no landmarks, just water as far as your eyes can see. You have a compass, which tells you where north is but doesn't tell you where you are. You have a map, but what good is it if you don't know which point on the map represents your current position? For centuries, this was every navigator's nightmare. They could calculate their latitude, that is, how far north or south they were, by observing the height of the sun or certain stars. But longitude, the east-west position, was an absolute mystery. And without knowing exactly where they were, even experienced navigators constantly got lost, leading entire ships to shipwrecks. The longitude problem was so serious that in 1714, the British Parliament offered what would be the equivalent of millions of dollars today to anyone who could solve it. It was the Longitude Prize, a sum so astronomical it attracted the greatest geniuses of the time. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. While renowned mathematicians and astronomers tried to solve the problem with complex calculations and elaborate theories, a self-taught carpenter named John Harrison was quietly working in a workshop in Yorkshire. His solution was so simple in concept, but so revolutionary in execution, that it would forever change the history of navigation. Harrison realized something all the academics had overlooked. Time was the key to unlocking the mystery of space. If you knew the exact time in 2 different places, you could calculate the distance between them. It was brilliant in its simplicity. But here was the problem: how to keep a clock running with absolute precision for months at sea, subjected to extreme temperatures, constant humidity, violent ship-rocking, and pressure variations. The clocks of the time were wildly inaccurate, losing or gaining several minutes per day. Harrison was undeterred. For decades, he worked obsessively, creating a series of marine chronometers that were true engineering masterpieces. His clocks not only withstood the harshest ocean conditions, but maintained near-perfect accuracy. His 4th creation, the H4, was a masterpiece. The size of a large pocket watch, it could keep time accurate to seconds during months of travel. To give you an idea of how impressive this was, An error of just 4 seconds per day would result in a navigation error of about 1.6 kilometers. Harrison's H4 was much more accurate than that, but the story of the resistance Harrison faced is almost as fascinating as his invention. The scientific community of the time, dominated by astronomers and mathematicians, simply could not accept that a mere carpenter had solved the problem they could not. They favored complex astronomical solutions involving lunar observations and elaborate calculations. Harrison's solution was too mundane for their refined tastes. For years, Harrison was ignored, discredited, and even sabotaged. His clocks were subjected to increasingly rigorous and unfair tests. Even when his creations proved to work perfectly, the experts found excuses not to recognize his achievement. It was only in 1773, when Harrison was already 80 years old, that King George III personally intervened and ensured he received the recognition and reward he deserved. But by then, Harrison had devoted his entire adult life to the project, sacrificing almost everything for his obsession. Here's what will intrigue you even more. Harrison's marine chronometers were not only accurate, they were, in many ways, superior to today's GPS systems. How so? Let me explain. Modern GPS depends on a network of satellites orbiting the Earth. If those satellites fail, or the signal is blocked, or there is electronic interference, you are completely lost. It is a centralized and vulnerable system. Marine chronometers, on the other hand, were completely independent. They did not rely on any external infrastructure, could not be hacked, and were immune to electronic interference. Once properly calibrated, they operated autonomously for months. More importantly, they taught navigators the art of truly understanding their position in the world. Using a marine chronometer required deep knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and geography. The navigator had to observe the sun and stars, perform complex calculations, and understand seasonal and geographic variations. Compare that with today's GPS. You just turn the device on, and it tells you where you are. But what if it fails? Most modern people would be completely lost because they never learned the fundamentals of navigation. Here's a fact that might surprise you. During World War II, when electronic systems were constantly attacked and sabotaged, marine chronometers became essential again. Experienced navigators who knew how to use these old tools often managed to bring their ships safely to port when all modern systems failed. But the true genius of marine chronometers goes beyond simple technical accuracy. Imagine this. You're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, holding only a small watch, and you can calculate your exact position by observing the sun. It's almost magical, isn't it? You're literally using the Earth's rotation as your reference system, connecting directly with the celestial movements that govern our planet. Each longitude calculation with a marine chronometer was a small exercise in communion with the cosmos. The navigator had to understand that the Earth rotates 360 degrees in 24 hours, that is 15 degrees per hour. If the clock showed it was noon at the Greenwich meridian, but the sun's observation indicated it was 2 p.m. at the current position, that meant the ship was 30 degrees west of Greenwich. It sounds simple, but performing this accurately on a rocking ship with delicate instruments and under adverse weather conditions was an art few mastered completely. And here's where the story becomes even more intriguing. Why was this technology abandoned? The answer is more complex than you might think. It wasn't simply because better technologies emerged. In fact, it was a combination of economic, political, and even psychological factors. First, accurate marine chronometers were extremely expensive. They cost the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars today. Only the most important ships could afford one, and even then they often carried several as backups. Second, using marine chronometers required years of specialized training. The navigator had to be an expert simultaneously in mathematics, astronomy, and nautical instrumentation. It was a highly specialized profession that few mastered fully. Third, and perhaps most importantly, industrial society was moving towards standardization and simplification. Systems that relied on individual specialized knowledge began to be seen as inefficient compared to technologies anyone could use. But here's what the planners didn't foresee. By abandoning these old technologies, we also lost fundamental knowledge and skills. How many of us know how to find directions using only the stars? How many can calculate the time by observing the sun's position? How many truly understand how celestial navigation works? These skills, which were essential to humanity for thousands of years, have practically vanished in just a few decades. And this brings us to a fascinating question. Has our total dependence on digital technologies made us more vulnerable? Consider this scenario. You're sailing your boat when a massive solar storm disables all electronic systems. Your GPS stops working, your radar goes blank, your radio communication cuts out. You're completely lost at sea, with no way to determine your position or direction. Now imagine you have a perfectly functioning marine chronometer, a sextant, and the knowledge to use them. You could still navigate accurately, independent of any electronic system. You would be completely self-sufficient. That is the true intelligence of marine chronometers. They didn't just work, they empowered people to be truly independent and competent. But the story gets even more interesting when you discover that some modern navigators are rediscovering these ancient technologies. In recent decades, there has been a quiet renaissance of celestial navigation, not just among traditional navigation enthusiasts, but also among professionals on commercial and military ships. Why? Because they realized that total dependence on electronic systems is a strategic vulnerability. Some of the world's most experienced navigators today master both modern technologies and ancient techniques. They know GPS is an excellent tool, but also understand they should never rely solely on it. Solo ocean sailors often carry marine chronometers as backups, not because they distrust GPS, but because they know electronic equipment can fail at the most critical moments. A well-maintained marine chronometer, on the other hand, can work perfectly for decades, and here's a detail that will surprise you. Old marine chronometers, especially those made by master watchmakers like Harrison, are today considered valuable investments. Some sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars at specialized auctions. But it's not just their monetary value that makes them special. It's the knowledge and tradition they represent. Each antique marine chronometer is a direct link to the golden age of navigation, when the world was still vast and mysterious, and mastering the oceans required true mastery. Can you imagine the feeling of being an 18th century navigator, responsible for hundreds of lives, sailing through unexplored oceans with just a chronometer and your skill in reading the stars? It was an immense responsibility, but also an incomparable freedom. Today, when you use GPS, you are essentially outsourcing one of humanity's most fundamental skills, the ability to orient yourself in the world. You become dependent on systems, controlled by others, vulnerable to failures and interferences completely beyond your control. But when you master celestial navigation with marine chronometers, you connect directly with the very workings of the universe. You use the Earth's rotation, the sun's position, the mechanical precision of a masterfully built clock, and your own intelligence to determine exactly where you are in the world. It's a feeling of competence and independence few experience in the digital age, and maybe that is the true legacy of marine chronometers. They remind us that true intelligence is not just about creating complex technologies, but about developing skills that make us truly capable and independent. So next time you use your GPS, remember the marine chronometers. Remember John Harrison, the carpenter who changed the world. Remember the navigators who crossed entire oceans with just a watch and their skill in reading the stars. And ask yourself, is our obsession with increasingly complex technologies making us smarter or just more dependent? The answer, like navigation itself, may be more complex than it seems at first glance. But one thing is certain. There are valuable lessons in these forgotten technologies that can still teach us a lot about true competence, independence, and the art of being genuinely connected with the world around us. After all, in a world where technology can fail at any moment, wouldn't it be wise to keep alive the skills that allowed us to explore and map the planet for hundreds of years? Wouldn't it be wise to understand that true navigation is not just about reaching the destination, but about deeply understanding where we are and how we got here? Maybe it's time to rediscover this forgotten tool that was, indeed, smarter than GPS, not just because of its technical accuracy, but because of everything it represented about the human ability to adapt, learn, and thrive in a vast and challenging world.